Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 24 of Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. I'm Sean Briggs, one of your co-hosts with my other co-host, Sam. Sam, how are you doing on this fine Sunday afternoon?
I would be doing better if I didn't have to watch if I didn't have to watch the Dungeons and Dragons.
The Lord of the Rings. Yeah. Have you ever seen this before?
No, I had seen bits and pieces. I remember when it came out, I was actually actively playing Dungeons and Dragons around this time with a group at a comic shop, but I don't think anybody liked it. We never really talked about it. It was not nearly as central to that culture at the time as the Lord of the Rings movie was. And probably for good reason, because, spoiler alert, this was not a good movie. What did you think of it, though, Sean?
Well, I hadn't entered my full consciousness yet of life, so I don't remember this even being talked about 23 years ago. It's a little over 22 years ago. But yeah, not a good film. A lot of times I just sat there thinking, what the hell is this? Really weird directing, acting, casting choices. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. But in the meantime, before we begin to talk about that, Sam, why don't you tell us how people can listen to us?
Oh boy. Well, if you're listening to us now, you maybe are doing it on a podcast app, which is great. Good way to do it. We're on all the major podcasting platforms. Maybe you're listening to us on YouTube, in which case, thank you. Please give that video a like and a comment on it. Subscribe to our channel. We are on all of the major podcasting platforms. And for those of you who want to reach out on social media, we are on social media, Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. We are also elvesringsnerdythings@gmail.com if that is more of your preference. So reach out to us. Let us know what you think about the show. Give us suggestions for future topics. If you watch any of the content that we cover, let us know your thoughts. And then if you are so inclined and you have some extra dollars per month to throw our way, we do have a subscription option. It helps us defray the cost of editing, hosting, transcribing, and other things to improve the quality of the podcast. So you can do that through Buzzsprout, a link to which is included in your podcast catcher or on our social media page.
And before we get to the real topic of today, some news broke since our last episode that Warner Brothers and New Line Cinema are re-engaging with Lord of the Rings. So new films will be coming out that take place during the time of the books. Now, it terrifies me a little bit that they're going to redo and recover some topics and time periods that the trilogy movies have already covered. So that makes me a little nervous. But there's a huge swath of information from the books that hasn't been seen on screen. So there's a chance that we could get some new stuff that won't make my blood pressure go through the roof. Sam, are you excited about the prospect of new movies that take place during the time of Lord of the Rings, or does it scare you?
I'm scared. I think on previous episodes, recent episodes, I mentioned how I was rereading The Lord of the Rings and reading it out loud to my wife, your sister Haley, and our soon-to-be-born child. Wanted to get them started on the right track. We recently finished The Lord of the Rings, and it struck me that I don't think what makes The Lord of the Rings great is attractive in modern Hollywood. I don't think people get it. And my fear is that any sort of adaptation, any sort of new movie would be kind of soulless. And you can kind of see this with the Marvel movies. I think Ant-Man right now, the third Ant-Man movie, is suffering at the box office. And the reviews for the Marvel movies have gone down relatively consistently since mainly the kind of the climax. Pardon?
Since Endgame came out?
Yeah, since Endgame. So I'm really worried that contemporary Hollywood doesn't really know what The Lord of the Rings is about or doesn't want to try to make that into a movie. And instead, it's going to be superficial, generic fantasy setting using the Lord of the Rings name as a marketing thing, similar to what we saw with the Rings of Power show. Maybe I'll be wrong.
Well, that's the thing that makes me hopeful, is that they're having the opportunity now to see how poorly received Rings of Power was, and maybe they can adjust course to try to not make the same mistakes.
That would be great.
There is word that Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh might be involved with the new movies coming out, which gives me hope as long as they don't do a Jackson Hobbit trilogy and go heavy on terrible CGI and they go back to what made Lord of the Rings so good with the practical effects. But we'll see.
We will see.
It was just announced in the last week, and we probably won't even see one of those movies for another 3-4 years. So,
I mean, there's also a chance we won't see any of those movies because this was announced on an investor call, as far as I understand. And I think right now there's a lot of pressure to keep your stock up as the market is obviously going through some fluctuations. We saw a lot of turmoil with Disney recently. And just because you announce that a movie is in development or a series of movies are in development doesn't mean they're actually going to be produced. It might just be something that they announce in the interim as they're making some fundamental restructuring. And I think there was also another story that came out that Warner Brothers Discovery is kind of shifting out of regional sports coverage. So they're definitely doing some restructuring. This could just be something that they threw in there to get some investor confidence or some enthusiasm. But yeah, look, we'll see if there's actually a movie coming out. I think there is something called the War of the Rohirrim. Have you seen
the
this?
Anime. It's an anime. Yeah.
Anime.
Have you seen this? Have you heard about this?
What is this? Actually, when it comes to animation, that is where I am more optimistic. I think it's easier to do animation. You can fail small and it's not going to ruin the property. I, for a long time, have thought that an animated Silmarillion anthology would actually be like, there would be an audience for that. It wouldn't be huge, but it wouldn't need to be huge because the budget wouldn't be earth-shattering,
I suppose. But that's the news. That's the only thing that's really happened since our last episode. But we are here today to talk about the 2000 Dungeons and Dragons film starring Jeremy Iron, Marlon
and some
Wayans,
other people.
and some other people. Those are the only two names that, I really knew of. But yeah,
I knew Thora Birch.
You knew Thora. I probably have seen her before, but
I think Hocus
Pocus.
Yeah, she's the little girl in Hocus Pocus. She was in American Beauty, which came out, I think, the year before this was released.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So she's in some movies. But Sam, why don't you give the listeners the plot summary of this film, and then we can start engaging with the material.
Okay, so quick disclaimer. When Sean and I normally recap a film or a show, we will write the recap on our own using the notes and our recollections of the actual material. For this case, I'm just going to read the Wikipedia summary because I don't feel like expending the energy to summarize this movie. So all credit to Wikipedia and whoever wrote the summary. Thank you for that. Here we go. Izmir's Empress Savina rules with the power of a scepter that allows her to control gold dragons. When she wants to give rights to the common people, she's opposed by the Council of Mages, led by Profion. They demand that she hand over the scepter. She refuses, and anticipating a conflict, both sides try to get the Rod of Savril, which would let them control red dragons. Teenage thieves Ridley and Snails try to rob the Sumdal Magic School. They're caught by a young mage named Marina, just as Profion's assistant Damodar attacks the library wizard to get his map to the Rod of Savril. Marina, Ridley, and Snails escape with the map and join with a dwarf named Elwood. They discover that to enter the tomb with the rod, they need a ruby called the Eye of the Dragon. Ridley finds it in a deadly maze in the Thieves' Guild in Antius, but Damodar arrives and captures Marina and the map. The rest of the group escape and meet the elf Norda, who is working for the Empress. They free Marina and get the map back, although Snails dies in the attempt. They get the Rod of Savril, although Damodar takes it from them and gives it to Profion. He and the other mages fight against the Empress with dragons on both sides until Ridley's group kills Damodar and gets the Rod of Savril back from Profion. Marina encourages Ridley to use the rod to bring Profion down, but Ridley, realizing the rod's power will corrupt him, refuses and destroys it. Then the Empress has a gold dragon kill Profion. Ridley later visits Snails' grave with Marina, Elwood, and Norda. When he places the Eye of the Dragon on the grave, Snails' name disappears, and the group is transported away to meet Snails. And that is your Dungeons & Dragons plot summary. Sean, were there any points in this summary that you disagreed with or found to be factually in error?
Well, that's a loaded question because I know you already found one, so I'm going to let you take that. To be honest, wasn't listening while you were just reading that.
Yeah, well, you did watch it relatively recently.
I did just watch the movie, so
Yeah.
I kind of tuned out while you were doing that. I
Well-
will start by saying, though, well, you tell the audience what you found is factually wrong, and then I will.
So Ridley and Snails are the two thief characters. Ostensibly, Ridley is the lead character. I think he has the most screen time and the most lines. They're not teenagers. They go out of their way to state their ages at some point in the movie, and they're not teenagers, which is fine. I'm not going to nitpick with the editors, but they
doesn't Snails say something that he's like 23?
He's
or something?
23. Yeah, and he says that in conversation trying to hit on the elf character. Anyway, so that was, we're not going to talk. This is not an episode about proofreading the Wikipedia page. I'll take care of that separately with the editors. But that is your plot summary. What are your overall reactions to this movie? I think we already mentioned it wasn't very good, but why wasn't it very good? Why did this movie not land, Sean?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying that I, about 40 times sitting on the couch watching this, kept thinking to myself, what is this? What am I watching? And how is this related to D&D? Besides the name and then some random monsters that are included that don't make sense for what the monster is. And that's the problem with all of these D&D properties, like these shows, movies. You have, I mean, with 5th edition, you have maybe 40 books of material that you can work from. So there's no excuse for you to not be able to get things right. And the biggest instance of this is when they're right before Snails dies and they're breaking into that like weird broken down castle or keep or whatever it was. They all of a sudden see a bunch of beholders acting as like guards for this keep or whatever.
Yeah.
And now the thing about beholders, they hate each other and they're solitary creatures that are incredibly smart.
Yes. So, usually they work on their own. You said they're solitary, not just solitary, but they're also tyrannical and incredibly intelligent. And they are, for instance, one of the most famous beholders in D&D is Xanathar, the head of the like most powerful thieves guild in the realm.
Waterdeep.
In Waterdeep. Yeah. So they're not patrol animals. You know what that really reminded me of? And I don't know if you've seen this movie. Have you seen Big Trouble in Little China?
Oh yeah. Great movie.
So there's a beholder in that movie, and it's kind of a throwaway. It's a little weird, but that whole movie is kind of tongue in cheek. So it made it whatever. That was the first thing I thought of. And then they don't even explain what these beholders are or why you need to be afraid of them. Even if they were just replace the beholder with a hellhound or any other animal or creature from Dungeons and Dragons, they didn't even explain why they're noteworthy. And there was no confrontation. The characters just throw a rock to distract it, even though it was sleeping anyway, and then sneak around behind it. And it was portrayed in terrible, terrible video game graphics.
The only reason they were included was to be like, hey, this is D&D, see?
Yes.
It was awful. I hated that. Besides the beholder and the reference to like red dragons and gold dragons.
In the hierarchy of dragons, gold dragons are the most powerful good dragon and are rivals with red dragons. Even though they were rendered so terribly on screen, it was really hard to tell which the difference was which.
Between them. Yeah. Only when they were like right next to each other could you tell one was gold and one was red. But yeah, the whole movie was awful. We were talking about what are we going to do next. I bought a 2-pack.
Oh no!
Off. My overlord Jeff Bezos's website, and the 2-pack comes with the direct-to-DVD sequel of this film, Dungeons and Dragons: Wrath of the Dragon God, I think is the name of it. So really thrilled to cover that one with you eventually.
So here's a question. Is this movie so bad it's good?
No.
Okay.
I was thinking that during the movie. There are movies that are so bad they're good. This one, it's so bad it's bad. It has a 10% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Mm-hmm. Deservedly so. That is an accurate rating.
I was surprised it wasn't lower. One of the other like fan scores, it was like a 1.5 out of 10 or like a 1.6.
That makes sense. It's about,
But, I guess fan scores are usually a little higher than the critic scores or critic ratings. But yeah, I honestly don't have much to say. We can talk about it from like start towards the beginning of the story and work our way back.
Well, maybe just an overall comment on the writing and the story itself. Movies like this, a fantasy movie, it always turns into some sort of big goose chase. You know, you got to get the map to get the rod. You got to get the map to get the ruby, to get the rod, to do this and that. And that is ostensibly what a lot, it's the kind of the quest type thing, the quest setup, but you don't understand the importance of any of these things. The overarching conflict of the movie, the political context, is a power struggle between this young empress and this council of mages, because the empress wants to give the common people more rights or something like that. But we never actually see the common people being oppressed. As far as we know, this world includes the council of mages, the empress, and then like 3 commoners, all of whom seem to be doing fine. Nobody's in extremis. There's no poverty that we really see beyond just kind of your generic Middle Ages people walking around in tunics type stuff. So they don't take the time to establish a story, to build a world. They just dive right into this, get the map, get the ruby, get the rod, summon the dragon type things.
And the only relationship that they build throughout the movie that I actually can believe in is, what's his name, Ridley and Marina, because there's actual like development there.
Yes.
Because even the relationship with Snails is kind of weird. And then all of the other characters, it's like the dwarf.
Who
they randomly run into him when he's in like a trash pile.
Yep.
And then the next scene, they don't even talk to each other. Then the next scene, he's just agreed to go with them, and they give no context to that.
Does he do anything
besides fight every once in a while?
Does he even fight anybody successfully? I don't know of one scene where his contribution is critical.
He buys them time at the very beginning when he fights Damodar or whatever his name is.
Okay.
And then that's it. Otherwise, he's just like a companion that they don't even give any like context. There's no dialogue where he's like, okay, yeah, I'll come. He just goes with them.
He's just there. I mean, he wants gold, right? That's one of his things. I think
he's a dwarf.
He's a dwarf, so he wants some gold. So he's going to come along, and they're going to get this ruby and the rod and whatever. The relation, I agree with you. Ridley and Marina, the mage, their relationship actually went somewhere. They have a kiss at the end, don't they?
They have a kiss at like the 2/3 mark.
Okay, so that's fine. The relationship between Snails, who's played by Marlon Wayans, and Ridley, I guess you could say that Snails has a character arc in that his body had a parabolic fall off of that roof from which he was thrown.
No offense to Marlon Wayans, but I was so happy when his character died.
I wrote down, I could not wait for him to die. His character his portrayal was so terrible
for 2 reasons. The first one, he's speaking like he's in the 21st century or 20th, because this is probably filmed in 1999. So you have that on top of, he screams a high-pitched scream throughout the entire first 55-60% of the movie until he dies.
Yes.
It got so old. Every scene he was in, he was doing this high-pitched comedy scream. And the tone of the movie, they really needed to figure it out, because there was times where they're trying to do like high fantasy. And then there's times where they're doing like this slapsticky 90s joke movie. And it's like, what is it?
Yeah, it was almost
pick something.
Yeah, it's like they filmed half of a fantasy movie and then half of a parody fantasy movie.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then they mushed them together.
Yeah, there was one line at the very beginning that I wrote down. That was Marlon Wayans, and he says, after that hold person spell or whatever that she casts with the rope, and he says, only way she can get guys to come home with her. That was such an out of line for what it's a D&D movie set in a fantasy world. That just seems so out of place to say that.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was weird.
I think a lot of the common threads for a lot of the performances in this movie were absolutely terrible. Even Justin Whalen, who played Ridley, the lead character, he was not bad. I think he was maybe the only person whose character was just kind of relatively straightforward. He's just a thief on a mission, right? And he's got a little bit of this kind of revolutionary edge to him. But I think everybody else really suffered from a lack of good direction. And I say that because the director was a first-time director and had been trying to get this movie made for at least over a decade and had no prior experience. And so I think a lot of the direction was just kind of, do something funny. So Marlon Wayans, start making jokes. And Marlon Wayans
start screaming.
And that's what it turned. It's funny when he's scared. I will say the only scene with Marlon Wayans that I actually liked was when he falls into quicksand, because that's actually it's a funny, good fantasy idea of the rug is secretly quicksand. It's kind of a magical trap, right? That was good. Of course, it resulted in him screaming more, and I wish he would have choked on that quicksand and shut up just to let us actually enjoy the interesting setup and what it looked like a practical effect.
It did, yeah. It very much looked practical. I think there was one scene or sequence that I left going, I liked that. And I'm going to give you one guess.
Oh, God. Oh, the maze in the Thieves Guild.
Yep.
Okay.
That was the only sequence throughout the entire movie that I walked away or sat there as the movie went on, but left that scene going, I enjoyed that. Yeah, I wouldn't really change anything. There was nothing glaring that I really disliked. They show up to this guy named Xylus at the Thieves Guild, and he says, okay, yeah, I'll give you this stone if you can solve this maze, because it's trapped at the end. And that was a cool dungeon scene. There's a bunch of traps that he's trying to maneuver. Mm-hmm. It was cool. I liked it.
I will say this. It wasn't a maze. It was a sequence of rooms with challenges.
Yep.
And they have an establishing shot kind of hinting at how vast this maze was. It was just 3 rooms in a row.
Mm-hmm.
So the sequence itself of him moving through these challenges was good. It was just, hey, people who write the story and who are creating this movie, reduce the dissonance between what we're seeing on screen and how it's being described.
And how it's being set up.
It's just call it the thieves gauntlet challenge, or something like that. The thieves challenge. If you can pass the challenge, then you can win the eye of the dragon. No one's done it. You don't need to say the maze. There's no maze.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a good sequence, and it was practical. That was real fire coming through those holes in the wall. The wall was actually moving as if it was going to crush him. The blades were actually spinning. That was a very well done sequence.
Going back to the very beginning, I had one thing that bothered me so much at the very beginning of the movie.
Uh-huh.
When Jeremy Irons releases this red dragon that for some reason is trapped underneath the city.
That was your dungeon and your dragon, right? All in one, right there. First scene.
How the hell did you get a dragon underneath the city?
It doesn't make any sense. Also,
and why, when you open the door, why is the only exit into your lab where all of your guys are? It doesn't make any sense.
There's tons of things that don't make sense. Don't make any sense. That scene should have come at a later point in the movie to demonstrate why Jeremy Irons' character wanted to get the actual Rod of Seville. It didn't make any sense coming at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's underlined by these terrible graphics. One thing I hated in this movie was the way the dragons were portrayed. They looked like Puff the Magic Dragon, but in a fantasy setting with this big bulbous nose. I cannot stand dragons that look like that. It is a dragon used to sell Saturday morning cartoon shows or something like that. It is not a fantasy dragon.
It wasn't a fantasy dragon, and they looked like legit PlayStation 1 Spyro animation with all of the live action going on around it. Okay. It looks so out of place.
So that's a really great segue into something that I noted. So there are several scenes that are filmed on location, and I think in the Czech Republic. There was those the castle ruins where Marlon Wayans' characters thankfully killed off. There is a large kind of, I think it's an orchestral hall or a music hall with a really intricate wood floor, and it's a circular, and it has these boxes throughout multiple stories, and that's used as kind of an audience chamber for the Empress and the Mage Guild. And then you had an ossuary with these really intricate sculptures and chandeliers and decorations made out of real human bone. And that was kind of Jeremy Irons' lair. So you had these really iconic, I hate to say iconic, but very striking visuals, very striking backdrops. And into those scenes, you insert terrible plug-in graphics. There was such a clash between what you were seeing, the background, and then the action. And then
I was going to say, like, so we have that, which is great with the terrible animation, but we also have Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, which comes out that same, or a year later.
Yeah.
December the following year in 2001. And the CGI that they choose to use is so much better. So I don't know if it was all of the sudden animation got that much better in a year, or you ran out of budget to do it right. You tried to rush it just to get the movie out. I don't know what it was, but it did not work.
The Dungeons and Dragons movie had a budget of $45 million.
And only brought in like 38 million, right? Didn't it lose like $7 million?
Yeah, something like that. It brought in about 34 million. The Lord of the Rings the Lord of the Rings for 3 movies had a total budget of $281 million. So significantly more budget than Lord of the Rings. Obviously, you had a more established. I think at that point, Peter Jackson had at least one Oscar nomination for Heavenly Creatures. The writing team did. You had some significant. You had more reason to think that this movie was going to be based on an established story. So a lot of the reasons why that comparison isn't. The Dungeons and Dragons movie was never going to get $100 million, even though the production, the guy behind it really wanted that much. But you as a set of filmmakers should know that and plan accordingly, and not over rely on graphics. So that's the other thing. You had this at the end of the movie, you had this gigantic dragon battle
where there's like 100 dragons in the sky,
100 dragons flying around the sky, breathing fire. It's all set over this medieval fantasy city, which is all CGI. And then you cut to the one room with the handful of actors and Jeremy Irons there. And it is such a strange juxtaposition. This looks like a direct-to-DVD release, but this was a theatrical release, but it looks like it was made on a significantly smaller budget than it was, because everything was kind of just pissed away.
Yeah, and it makes me terrified to watch the sequel to this film.
Okay, well, if you want to go just on budget, the budget for the sequel, that is Dungeons and Dragons: The Wrath of the Dragon God.
Can I guess?
You can guess, yeah.
Did they lower it to like 25 million?
They lowered it, but you're going to have to go a little bit lower than that.
Lower?
Yep.
20?
Nope.
15?
Nope.
Are you kidding me?
$12 million was the budget for the sequel.
I'm so excited to watch that movie now.
Oh, I can't wait.
Truly.
Yes.
I'm not even saying that sarcastically. I'm saying that as with that low of a budget, this one might actually be so bad it's good.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking. I'm actually looking forward to. I think this. Yeah, I think you're right.
This one is so bad it's bad. The other one I think is going to be so bad it's good. Hopefully.
So, I was thinking about something as you were talking about Marlon Wayans. Compare this to how Vox Machina does it, how Critical Role does it. The humor is intentional. It's not frequent. It's not a constant. You're not being bombarded with screaming and comic bullshit like you are in this movie. And the jokes are funny and slightly irreverent. And then you go right back to the action. That, I think, is the trick to if you wanted to make this movie better, get somebody who actually knows how to write comedy, and insert and make the Marlon Wayans character actually funny instead of just annoying and stupid.
Yeah. Well, I will say the good thing for Marlon Wayans is that this movie probably secured all of his roles in all those spoof parody movies throughout the 2000s.
Yeah, when his direction was just scream and be goofy.
So I'm sure he did well from this. But yeah, the guy who plays Ridley, did he do much after this?
Well, let's see. Before this, he was on, what is it, the Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. The funny thing was, while we were watching it, I said to myself, he looks like Dean Cain.
I was going to say he looks like Christian Slater. His hair is like the Christian Slater Robin Hood with Kevin Costner.
That too. Yeah, so let's see here. He let's see, Dungeons and Dragons. And he did some other things. Nothing big as far as no major movies. And then he didn't go back to television after this. Yeah, okay. So this movie kind of was the end of his career as a major player. I don't know how. I remember Lois and Clark being a relatively successful and popular show. He was Jimmy Olsen, so not exactly a minor character, but yeah, this was not a good career move. I would love to learn more about Jeremy Irons' involvement in this.
Yeah, because there's scenes where he definitely overacts.
Oh my, he's chewing the scenery.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
It's pretty bad.
And again, that's an area where you think, is that what the director actually wanted? Or is that what Jeremy Irons was doing because he was receiving either no direction or disagreed, and this director was just not able to get from him what the director wanted? Yeah. And I really don't know if the director knew what they wanted, because they had a script. Mm-hmm. But
yeah, honest to God, who knows?
Yeah.
A couple of the other things. So let's go to like costuming and world building for a moment.
Okay.
I felt like most of Damodar, or whatever his name is, his outfit looked fake, like really cheap Ren Fair outfit. Anything that was metal in this movie looked fake, besides the swords at the end. Like the dwarf's axe was clearly foam.
All of the armor
looked awful.
Paper mache with tin foil. It was terrible. Did you notice Norda, the elf? She had that breastplate thing.
Yeah,
it looked so fake. And just like the breasts and the nipples were exaggerated. It looked
like it had areolas at one point.
I was like, did they get that secondhand from like a porn set or something like that? Like, what the hell?
From the porn spoof, Double D's, Dungeons and Dragons.
There you go. Hey.
So yeah, those things. And there was a scene when the dwarf was running with the axe, and I was like, it just looks so fake. And one of the good things about Lord of the Rings filming during the filming of this movie, they go out of their way to use things that look practical and real. It really helps you immerse yourself into the film and the story being told. Like, could you imagine Gimli if he's fighting with an axe that looked foam? It'd be like, what the fuck's going on?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Those things were really bothering me. And then there was one thing, like we talked earlier, you have all of these D&D books that are source material that should make this a pretty flawless interpretation. Like, you have all of the descriptions of things and characteristics of things, and then they're in that Thieves Guild town, which I guess is the one problem I do have with that sequence. There's a weird character race that was like purple and had that weird eye in the forehead.
Yeah.
Like, you have so many different character races available to you. Why do you have to create this weird looking thing? It's not D&D.
I did have a thought before they went to that Antius play the Thieves Guild city and interacted with that character. They were in the inn or some tavern in the main city, and we get these shots, and you have all of this. It was kind of like the cantina in Mos Eisley, where it's just not there's just a bunch of people in rubber masks or weird makeup, a lot of face paint too, to show that people are exotic creatures. And none of them are done well, so it just looks terrible and doesn't actually help with world building, because none of the characters matter. Again, no movie is going to look good compared to Star Wars, but in the cantina, it's obviously showing well, because you actually focus on some of these characters and their strange outlandishness about how weird diverse. And big the galaxy is. Yeah, it's diverse, and you get bits and pieces of it, but here they're just kind of there as window dressing, and it looks like trash. And it's not consistent with Dungeons and Dragons, so you don't get the benefit of showing Dungeons and Dragons players things that they like to see, basically fan service, nor do you get the benefit of demonstrating how interesting and diverse the world is, because it's bad and distracting, and then also not really something that is remarked on, or all the characters are just kind of just there in this tavern.
My last note that we haven't talked about, and it still has to do with like that world building and set development. A couple of the scenes look like they came straight out of Legends of the Hidden Temple. I guess this is one of my qualms with the maze scene at the end when he takes the ruby off. It looked like it was Legends of the Hidden Temple. But yeah, I don't have anything else to say really, unless you have things you want to talk about. Looking through my notes, we covered everything that I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I had one other stray observation that was just kind of how the portrayal of elves in this, where you get the kind of stereotypical elves are magical and mystical and stoic and have some sort of wisdom, but it just comes off as so weird because we don't actually get any characterization for the elves. They just happen to show up.
So deadpan the whole time too.
He is really deadpan. And she had some scene where I think Ridley and Snails were infiltrating that castle, and Marina says, "Oh, we should help them." And Norda, the elf character, turns to them and says, "No, it is their destiny to do this alone." And it was just so strange. Because why are you just making these pronouncements? We have no hint up to that point that you're mystical or anything. You're just a ranger. You're just tracking people through the wood. And then we get that scene later on with the elf king, or the king of the elves, who character's never introduced.
He's just there to save Ridley, and then that's it.
Yeah, that's just it. We have no idea of how long it took them to get there. There's no setup for what this place is. This was very much the Fellowship goes to Lothlorien scene, and without any of the setup. And then he's spouting off about how dragons are nature and life and blah blah blah.
Oh yeah, if the dragons die, we die, or the magic dies. Some really random plot device.
And it was one of those things where at no point was I ever worried that the dragons were all going to be killed. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a rod of dragon extermination. It was a rod of dragon control. And I was pretty sure at the end of it, there were going to be some dragons still alive. I wasn't worried about that. Yeah, it was.
Can we talk about
only
the
so
ending?
many? Yeah, sure.
Right when the movie ended, I texted you and I said, "What the fuck?" Because there's this scene. They build like this little, oh God, why can't I think of it? What's the stack of the stacking stones called?
It's not a cairn.
Yeah, it is. It's a cairn.
Okay, a cairn.
That's what I'm thinking of. Ridley builds like a cairn to Snails and like puts that dragon ruby on it and is like, "Yeah, you got your big score, buddy." Trying to have the sentimental jokey moment at the end. Then wind blows. The name Snails on the cairn like dissolves and the ruby starts glowing. And then the elf is like, "Snails is waiting for you." And she puts her hand on it. He puts his hand on it. The dwarf and the mage do. And then all of a sudden they're transported somewhere.
Yeah.
And the movie ends. And it's like,
well, they ran out of money. They had to end it somehow. So the best thing to do is to be transported with some crap CGI.
To the afterlife, apparently. Like,
yeah, you know what I said to Haley as we were watching this? I was like, J.K. Rowling stole the idea of the resurrection stone from this movie.
It was so bad.
This is a really minor nitpick, but it speaks to the fact that we had an amateur director. I have seen hundreds of times that shot of a leaf blowing along the ground, and then it kind of leads into something. Mm-hmm. And they did that here, but they zoomed in too much. And so you have like a close-up shot of a leaf, and then it's usually kind of a pan across and then up into something to show people. But in this case, it was just following a leaf on the ground and then a hard cut to people looking at a grave. It was just such a terrible execution of what is at this point basically like a trope. I'm sure film schools teach like, okay, you got to get the leaf just right. And, you know, if the wind's not blowing, you got to have a fan and a piece of string, and then you only want one leaf. And then this, they just completely butcher it. I'm sure the groundskeeper at that graveyard was like, okay, you have 5 minutes and then get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, not much good. I'll say this to the viewers everywhere. What gives me hope that the new D&D movie is going to be good, which is Honor Amongst Thieves, is the type of comedy that they're going after. Like the most recent trailer that we put on our Facebook page, where they give us the clip of Speak with Dead, where they're using real D&D spells. They're using them in a way that D&D parties and groups in real life would use them, and it's funny. Mm-hmm. They're not seemingly trying to force themselves to be funny. It seems natural, and I really hope that it is executed well, because this 2000 movie is so bad that I'm hopeful. But even now, at least we have Critical Role and Vox Machina. So there is somebody doing D&D well, that not a whole lot is resting on this movie that comes out at the end of March. So
yeah, there are only so many ways to say that this was a bad movie. We've said some of them. I'm sure other people have ways to say it as well. So if you're out there and you've watched this Dungeons and Dragons movie, let us know. Are we committing to covering the sequel?
I think we should, yeah.
I think we should too. I want to dive a little bit deeper. There is an absolute ton of coverage or explanation for how this movie was made, which I'm looking forward to diving into a little bit more as well. If you are I don't want to say a sucker for, but if you don't mind watching a terrible movie in order to maybe squeeze a little bit of enjoyment out of it, I would recommend Dungeons and Dragons.
I would say if you watch this movie and you liked it, please reach out to us so we can understand why.
Yeah. And then make sure that you donate your brain to science so we can understand the specific chemistry that results in that opinion. Anyway, I guess that's probably it for us and the Dungeons and Dragons movie. There's not a lot here.
Yeah, no, I'm all tapped out, I think. Looking ahead, next week we will be doing a really short episode, just kind of titled Why Fantasy? So Sam's preparing for Baby Marvin 2023. So we're going to kind of give him a break here, at least next week, where he doesn't have to do any prep. And we're going to do an episode of just why we like fantasy content, fantasy material. We might talk about our favorite fantasy topics, and yeah, we'll just do a little short conversation.
In the meantime, if you have any insights on why fantasy is great, why you like fantasy, or why you don't, let us know. Elves Rings Nerdy Things on Facebook, elvesringsnerdythings@gmail.com. Thank you for the listen. Please share this podcast with anyone who you think might enjoy it, and we will see you next time, amigos.